Hello everyone, I'm Joe High, and in today's blog we have a very special guest interview with Stacy Pearsall. Stacy is an award-winning photographer from South Carolina who has started a special long-term project called the Veterans Portrait Project. As the name implies, the Veterans Portrait Project consists of portraits of service members from all generations and backgrounds. This project sparked from Stacy's time as a combat photographer while serving in the Air Force. Today we will talk with Stacy about her time as a combat photographer and the Veterans Portrait Project. So sit back and enjoy. Hi Stacy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, I appreciate you having me.
So Stacy, I've already done a bit of an intro for you, but I saved some of it for you to sort of introduce yourself. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and just kind of get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a military photographer for 10 years, and that included a time as a combat photographer. And, after getting injured in Iraq, I was medically retired from service, and I started the Veterans Portrait Project during my recovery. And I also had the Charleston Center for Photography for several years, where it was sort of this grassroots photography school in Charleston. And I also am an independent photographer doing photojournalism, which is really where my roots lie. So I'm kind of busy doing a lot of things, but ultimately the Veterans Portrait Project is where I'm, putting most of my energies right now.
That's where your passion is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's great. I wanted to ask what exactly, because this may be a new concept for some people. I know when I was speaking with some of my friends saying, oh, I'm going to interview a combat photographer, they were like, what's that? And it just didn't really click that, we need to get photos of everything that's going on over there. So can you kind of explain what the main duties of a combat photographer would be? What your main duties were?
Yes. Well, for combat photographers, their first and foremost priority is to document the combat as it happens, and mainly photojournalistic style. And those images are often used for battlefield commanders to get a sort of bird's eye view of the battle space as it's unfolding. And those images are also used back here in the U.S. by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, other folks like that. And secondary, the images are also used by media. A certain select number of images are pushed out to the wire every day by the Department of Defense. And a lot of that was because some of the journalists couldn't get out to where this combat action was happening. And thirdly, of course, it's for historic preservation. So, if you were to turn on a History Channel, a lot of that imagery and footage was taken by combat photographers that were before me, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So that's in a nutshell what a combat photographer does. There's a lot of other ways that they've used us, but those are the primary.
Okay, great. Actually, yeah, that was, I didn't actually realize that the secondary purpose of the photographs were for the media. I guess I figured that the media wanted coverage of, photographic coverage of everything that's happening over there, that they would send one of their own people. But you were an actual service member, correct? You were working as a soldier. Your job was a photographer, is that correct?
Yes. But the military also sent me to journalism school. So I took a year and I went to Syracuse University. And, I took the same classes as a civilian journalist would when they were getting their education. Okay,
Syracuse University. It's not far from here, actually.
It's a good school.
Yeah.
Little plug for my alma mater.
There you go. Shout out to Syracuse University. Yes. Were you a photographer before joining the Air Force?
I was a kid before joining the Air Force. I graduated at 17. I joined the service at 17.
Oh, so you started at 17.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Jumped right into it then.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you started to really learn photography, or?
Well, I had taken a couple of film classes, just black and white stuff in high school, but I was really more drawn to doing like drawing and painting. But when I joined the service, there was graphics design, there was still photography, and there was motion media. And being young and impatient, I picked the first that opened up, and that happened to be photography.
Okay. So you didn't necessarily choose to be a combat photographer because you wanted to join the service and be a photographer. It was just, it kind of fit into what you already knew.
Well, photography wasn't necessarily a passion of mine right out the gate. And, I was young. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something in the arts. But, I went to the Defense Information School in Washington, D.C., and my first assignment outside of technical training was actually into intelligence, where I processed U-2 spy plane film. And I did that for 4 years, and I knew that was not what I wanted to do. And I had heard about combat camera from a fellow early on in my career, and I set my sights on doing that. And as a first term, what we call like your first enlistment is called the first term. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to join combat camera. At least that was the regulation at that time. They wanted people who were on their second term, who had some time in the service, were older and more seasoned. And so I had to get past my first term. I was doing a lot of shooting on the side and kind of building up a portfolio, educating myself. And finally, a spot opened up at the 1st Combat Camera Squadron in Charleston, and I submitted a package to apply and get into combat camera.
Okay, gotcha. So this is probably an ignorant question, having never been in the service, but as a combat photographer, were you trained, like, did you go through a normal boot camp training just like every other soldier, or was it something more specific just for a photographer? Because you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're actually in the field. I mean, for those who are listening, this isn't like, get a 1,000mm lens and take pictures from way back out of the range. You were right there with the soldiers who had the guns, correct?
Right. So I went to basic training like every other airman did in the Air Force down at Lackland Air Force Base. And I had to follow on to the Defense Information School, where I learned a lot more about photography and film processing. And after that, like I said, I spent 4 years doing U-2 spy plane film processing. And upon my second enlistment, I reported to combat camera. And now at that time, they were making the transition, or had made the transition, to using digital cameras. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of catching up to do technically. And a lot of the training happened within my first 6 months. It was really aggressive. So I learned how to use satellite systems and transmit digital imagery. And as by the time I reported to combat camera, it was January 2002. So a lot of my unit was in Afghanistan. And, there's a lot to do to prep somebody to go to combat. And as we continue to evolve and get deployed to more and more places, including Iraq, we also had to take on learning new tactics and weaponry. And that included close quarters combat training, tactical driving courses, weapons training. That went along with, as an Air Force person, we of course focused on, at the time, how to operate around aircraft, but right. we were starting to work a lot with the Army, and that required us to learn Army tactics. And so we had to do additional courses, and a lot of my deployments were actually with the Army. So it changed how we viewed our training. Okay,
great. So how old were you when you were wounded and had to retire?
27 years old when I was wounded. I was 28 when they medically retired me.
Okay, so you had 10, 11 years in the service of doing this.
Yeah, I was put on temporary retirement in August 2008, and they finally permanently retired me in July of 2010. So I was at over 10 years by the last time I wore a uniform.
Okay. So would you say that your passion for photography is a result of your time as a combat photographer?
Yes, I would have to say that when I first got into photography, it was so technical that all I really wanted to do was put what I saw in front of me that was really creative and make a picture of it, but my my technical ability didn't match my creativity. And it got really frustrating, and, it was not a match made in heaven initially. But once I grasped the technical aspect of photography and learned how to harness the fundamentals, I really started to excel, and the passion grew over time.
It's interesting to hear you talk about what you're doing here as a photographer in kind of the same tone that most photographers would speak about their craft. But just thinking about it, when I do a wedding, there are no bullets flying through the air, and you speak of it so not really lightheartedly, but almost out of context. It would seem sort of casual. Yeah, I guess I wasn't expecting that. But you obviously enjoyed your time as a combat photographer.
Yeah. Well, people ask me, was it difficult? Absolutely. But with anything that you do repetitively, it's easy to mute all the extraneous things. Like when you drive a car, it's dangerous to drive a car. There are a lot of things that could take place. But can you remember every single turn you made, that routine trip from your house to the grocery store? Can you remember every single turn you made, every color car you passed? No, because it's become so routine. And every morning in combat, you wake up and you say, okay, there's a risk here. There's bombs and there's bullets and there's all these other things, but you have to quiet all of that noise in order to focus your energies. And the other benefit of being behind the camera is that once you put the camera to your face, your view is you're basically behind blinders, because your view is now limited to the millimeters in front of your face.
I've never thought of it that way. That's a good comparison with the driving, though. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had the same experience of kind of focusing in, as you say, on the millimeters in front of my face during a wedding, but again, totally different situation. So maybe on a much, 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 much smaller scale, I can say, yeah, I've had that experience too, but on a much smaller scale.
Well, it's all relative.
So can I ask you, do you have any story or any particular photo that you have a story behind that could that you'd be willing to share from the field that would kind of give an idea for what it was like to be over there doing this kind of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm often asked, do I have a favorite photo? And actually, I tell people I have a favorite collection of photos that no one's ever seen, and that's the portraits of the guys who passed away. And I made it a habit of taking portraits before we went out on operation, just in case there was the event that they didn't come home. And those are the ones that really had the most meaning to me personally. But if you're talking about pretty photographic pictures, honestly, in combat, people tend to view the literal, and that by that I mean the blood and the explosions and the chaos. But I really loved the moments between the chaos and the humanity, and I really find it. And I don't mean to also sound really lighthearted about it, but I like to put the humanity back into soldiers. I think that there's this idea that they are invincible and somewhat gladiator, these inhuman people. But I liked the moments where, they're dressed in full combat gear and they had just engaged in a firefight, and then they go and sit on a porch swing and act as if they're at their home, their neighborhood. All they need to do is crack open a beer and start talking football. Those are the moments I like to focus on.
And that's probably the best way to go into this as well. Is I'm looking at your photos right now, and there is definitely a theme. This work that you feature isn't all, explosions and blood and stuff. There's definitely the scenes of, war. There's buildings that have been demolished and stuff, but you also have pictures of, soldiers I guess in between action, laughing and joking with each other. See a lot of, I don't know what the term is for a dog that's a soldier. But
yeah, he's a military working dog.
There you go, military working dogs, and a lot of good work like this. And can you go ahead and throw out your website there, just so people can know where to check this out? Because it would probably, for those who are listening, if you want to, this is just an audio podcast, so feel free to go and check out Stacy's website while you're listening to this.
Yeah, you can just go to stacypearsall.com.
Okay.
And you'll find my homepage.
Well, I'm already there, yeah. So I guess. So for those of you who weren't already there, go ahead and check it out and keep listening. So going back to the troops themselves, how did the troops react to having a photographer with them? Was it more of a kind of get out of our way sort of thing, or did they really welcome the chance to have some documentation?
Well, it really depended on the unit and what their past experiences had been with journalists and photographers. And I've been with units that never had a journalist with them, and they were, skeptical initially because I was a photographer, I was Air Force, and I was a female. Three of the things that they rarely ever saw, and especially not combined together.
Yeah, all put into one package.
Yeah. So there's a few hurdles I had to overcome with every single unit. But, in terms of the photography aspect of it, there was one particular unit who were very leery about having me there because a civilian journalist had been with them only a couple of months prior. And one of their soldiers had been wounded, and the journalists published the photos before the family was notified, and there was a lot of animosity. And they kind of lumped me in with that negativity because I had a camera and they considered me a journalist, and they thought that I was there just to take advantage of those moments. And so I had to really work hard to earn their respect and, maintain my own journalistic values. And, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, and that's part of the skill of any photographer, is being able to work with your subjects, with whoever it is. So, right. And you were put in situations where that was definitely put to the test, because that's just, yeah, I can see how they would be skeptical having that sort of situation have come up before.
Yes. I
was actually watching The Grid when you were on with Scott Kelby.
Uh-huh.
And it was interesting. You had said that you would, if you could, you would go back to being a combat photographer, I guess, had you not been wounded and had to retire. But you would go back to being a combat photographer. Is that right?
Absolutely. It was a really rewarding occupation, and more so because of being able to bring the front lines home to those back here in the States, and to keep everybody, in the know, so to speak. But also, to be able to be there with the troops and, I guess, also provide, like I said, one of the most important things for me was the historical aspect of it. And again, some of the more important pictures for me are the ones that people will never see, of those who didn't survive the war. And I think that responsibility alone was worth everything.
Yeah. I was just thinking that, again, this is probably not the first occupation. When somebody says, I'm a photographer, the person listening is probably not going to assume that they're a combat photographer. This is kind of a unique calling. But think about what it would be like if we didn't have this, if there was never any visual documentation. And I wanted to thank you for what you do in the service. And I know it's a unique job. This podcast is going to be going up over Veterans Day, or Veterans Day week, if you will. And so I wanted to thank you, first of all, since you're right here. But I really am glad that there's people like you out there who are doing this so that we can appreciate what the brave men and women of this country do in the service.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'd be remiss in saying that, I did all the hard work, because really I just took pictures of the hard work going on. And the majority of the thanks needs to go to those subjects of my pictures who, allowed me into their lives for that moment in time and trusted me enough to take the pictures and revealed a part of their humanity so that I could capture those moments. And, these guys are the strong ones, and I was just fortunate enough to be in that moment in time with them.
I think that's a good position to take. But at the same time, this is kind of the best way to say thank you. I mean, I'm looking at it from a photographer's perspective, and I think that without photos like this, again, it would be more difficult to just appreciate everything that's done over there. So yeah, I do understand, where you're coming from, but thank you anyway, Stacy.
You're welcome.
The Veterans Portrait Project, this is what you've been kind of pouring your heart and soul into now. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it began?
Well, I started it much out of my own healing process. And I was feeling really negative because I was, forced out of service because I wasn't physically able to do it anymore, and feeling frustrated because my healthcare transferred to the VA and they weren't ready for young females. And I also feeling alienated from the veteran community. And one day I was kind of at my wit's end. I was waiting for my neurology appointment 2 hours past my neurology appointment. And just this bitter seed had kind of started growing. And I could see a veteran staring at me from my peripheral vision. And I was hearing the devil talk in my mind and basically saying, would this guy just stop staring at me? This isn't a meat market, and all these other things. And then the angel inside of me said, just quiet down and ask him what he wants, So I turned to him and I said, is there something I can help you with? And then he started pouring his heart out to me about being a World War II veteran and his enlistment and being there on D-Day and liberating a concentration camp in Poland. And he went on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting next to an American hero. And I was about to chew him out. Something kind of snapped inside me at that moment. And I had to wake myself up to reality that this was that I had to go through combat and be a combat photographer to accomplish my new mission in life, and that's the Veterans Portrait Project. Because I really had no idea. I was so fixated on being a combat photographer that I didn't realize that my true calling was the Veterans Portrait Project. And to be able to relate the veterans I was photographing to start their healing process while also continuing mine. So that's where it started.
Okay. I love hearing that. Yeah, I'm looking at the gallery right now for the Veterans Portrait Project. And again, for listeners tuning into this, check out this gallery. I think that I haven't found any color photographs. They're all black and white. And these are veterans from many different generations here. I'm seeing some say World War II. I don't know what's the range that you photographed as far as veterans from different wars. Any from like World War I or?
Well, all the World War I guys are passed away, as far as I know, and so it's World War II, and I think the oldest veteran I photographed so far is 98.
Okay.
And the youngest I photographed is 18.
Wow. Does that include the dogs?
Well, no. Some of these dogs are 4 and 5 years old, but that's not fair.
So anywhere between 98 and 4.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No, good point.
So, what is it about the Veterans Portrait Project? I mean, you've talked about how it's a healing process for you, but what do you think, in your own words, what is it about the Veterans Portrait Project that encourages the veterans themselves? What is it about getting their picture taken and having a part in this that helps them, that encourages them?
Well, I think, one group in particular, the Vietnam War veteran, did not have the welcome home that, say, the World War II folks enjoyed, or even Operation Enduring Freedom or Iraqi Freedom. I would say that we were treated very respectfully, and they were not. But I feel that, and much like myself, with the frustration and anger of, feeling like I gave all the best of my life and the most of my energy to the service, and then being left behind, so to speak. I believe that the Vietnam veterans felt that 100 times over. And by taking their portraits and saying, you know what, thank you for your service, welcome home, I believe it lets them know that at least me, this one person, loves and respects them, and that I hope that they know I speak for the majority of the other American citizens. But that's, it's part of the healing process, and acknowledging their service and being proud of it versus, what they've been told from so many years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not just the veterans from Vietnam. There's just some outspoken people who are just against service members altogether for whatever reason, and unfortunately, they have a loud voice, and it can be very discouraging. And again, I've never been in the service, but I have a great appreciation for those that have. And I think that they deserve respect, and I think that this is a great way to just say thank you.
Well, always remember, and I remind myself of this too, and I've encountered some negativity, but we fight for the American people and for the constitutional rights, and one of those is the freedom of speech. And so everyone is entitled to their opinion and their thought process, and I'm not here to change that. So if they don't agree with it, that is completely fine, and that's what the blood was shed for. So, and it was on the backs of veterans. So I always remind people to hate the war, not the person who fought it.
I like that. That's a good point. So, what is the end goal for the Veterans Portrait Project? I know you're still working on it. So, at what point do you think you will be done?
I'm often asked that same question.
I figured you would be.
I would have to say that I don't see an end in sight, because I want to photograph as many veterans as possible, and that's going to be a lifelong endeavor, because there are millions of veterans, and there's no way that I can touch them in 5 years, Mm-hmm. So far I've photographed 5,600, and that's been since 2008. Mm. And I've photographed in, I think, 26 states. I've got a few more states to go. I've wanted to photograph in every state, so that's going to take me a while.
You've been to New York already?
I've been to New York, yes.
Okay, well, all right. Check that one off. Had to ask.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess that does make sense, though. I guess while there's still veterans, there's still portraits to be taken.
This is very true.
Well, at some point, for whatever reason, when it is finished, how would you like it to be remembered?
I would like the Veterans Portrait Project to be remembered as a community service, something that drew the community together, remembrance of all the veterans who served, kind of like my time in service when I took those portraits, and historical documentation of all those who may have not had movies made about them, but yet equally as important, and educational, because this shows that the military family is just everyone, a wide swatch of American people. It's young and old, could be Jewish or Muslim or Christian, they could be black, white, Cuban, and Asian, and everyone in between. And we all have one commonality. We've served our country and the country we love.
That's great. Can you tell us about, I was looking at your website, and I was trying to get a good link for these, but I know you've written a couple books, and can you tell us about those?
Well, the first book I put out was Shooter, Combat from Behind the Camera, and that was also too part of my healing process. And every single picture I've taken has this history behind it, an emotional tie behind it, and part of my healing through post-traumatic stress disorder was to put bookends on it, so to speak. And Shooter was a way for me to take some of my journals and the pictures and put it on pages and just reveal it to the world or whomever wanted to see it, and a way to get it out there, out of my mind and out in the world. So that's out there. And then the second book I did was a photojournalist field guide that was focused on what I had learned over the course of my military career. And it's just a look at some advice that I have and some thoughts from everywhere from like my thought process on how I shoot and recommendations and story styles and story approach, and also little tips and tricks if you're going to be out in high risk environments, what you don't want to leave home without.
So that's more that's geared more towards photographers themselves.
Yes, it's for those photo geeks out there who want to read about photo stuff.
All right. So for the geeks listening, there you go. Check it out. All right. Well, being a veteran yourself and having met, what did you say, 5,600?
Yes.
5,600 veterans. What kinds of things would you say give the most encouragement to service members? Like what can we do that brightens the day? Is it just saying thank you? Is it if you're a photographer taking their pictures, or what can people do just to remind these service members that they are appreciated and that we do care?
Well, actions speak louder than words. So you can say to them, thank you for your service, but you can also show it. And for me, that was actually doing this portrait series. It's a way for me to actually get out and do something tangible for them, and a way to honor those I served with or those who served before me. Now, if you want to actually get out there and do something for the veterans, you can do something. You don't have to do portraits, but you can do something that means a lot more. You can volunteer at the soup kitchen or the homeless shelter for veterans. You can go to the VA hospital and sit with the retirees that don't have family in the area and just chat with them. You can do a drive where they constantly need clothing and socks and shoes and deodorant and all that good stuff for the veterans shelters, because there is sadly a large number of homeless veterans out there. You know, there are a lot of things within your community. You don't even have to leave your hometown. You can do it right there.
Well, in Bath here, we actually do have a VA center right in Bath. It's literally down the street. We can go there at any point. So, but this is really all it takes, is just volunteering some time, maybe being a listening ear. And that really, and that's really appreciated that much. Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be done solely by you. You can get your family involved, and your kids if you have kids, or your neighbors, and something that you can do together as a community. Well, thank you, Stacy. Thank you for this conversation. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me and reminding everyone about the service members out there, and thank you for everything that you've done.
Again, thanks for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share this message, and happy Veterans Day to all you veterans out there.